I will, at this time, begin the SIETAR USA November webinar. I'm Sandy Fowler, President of SIETAR USA, and I thank you for joining us today. Please keep your computer on mute during the presentation, and don't forget to unmute when you want to ask a question. This is the logistics part of the webinar. Rita will be taking questions in the last half hour of the webinar, but questions of clarification you can put in the chat room and I will relay those to Rita. If you would like to listen to the recording of this webinar or any of the others in the series, they are on the website, SIETAR USA website, in the members only section of Get Enriched. The webinars are listed titled. For non-members, there is a small fee for access to the recording that you want. You'll be sent the link for whichever recording you would like. I would now like to switch from logistics to today's webinar. I've known Rita Wuebbeler for a long time. She was an early member of SIETAR International, and she was on the founding board of SIETAR USA. I think maybe she was about 5 years old when she joined.
Thank you, Sandy.
You are welcome. After spending at least 2 years on the board of SIETAR, she was the conference program chair. She served on the advisory council under several presidents, and she was the co-founder of Pride to Creators, a special interest group within SIETAR that is still going strong. I noticed that the special interest group table for Pride Across America had the most people and the best conversation at the recent conference in Atlanta. So I now would like to turn the program over to Rita, who will talk to us today about leadership in the intercultural context. Her talk is titled Personal Leadership, 6 Practices and 2 Principles to Help Build Cultural Competence and Resilience, a tool that keeps on giving. Rita?
Thank you, Sandy, and good morning, everyone. And my first of all, apologies for the long title, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. But before we go any further, I'd like for all of us to spend just 2 minutes on a bit of stillness to get us centered and into a space of listening and receiving. So I'm going to use my tried and tested Insight Timer app, and I'm going to put it on 2 minutes. And so if you wouldn't mind, in your chairs, if you're sitting on a chair or wherever you are, take in a relaxed but somewhat upright position. And I'll do the same with both feet on the ground. And you can have your hands on your thighs. And just take a somewhat deeper breath to sort of start clearing out some of the things that you might be thinking about that had you in the group when you first entered the webinar space here. So in the next 2 minutes, just keep breathing regularly and just enjoy the stillness. If you have a practice of meditation, you can just do your practice, or otherwise just maybe close your eyes and enjoy the silence. So you'll hear a gong in about 5 seconds and then another one in 2 minutes when it's time to start. So here we go, 5 seconds. So open your eyes slowly and rejoin our webinar with eyes open. And the reason I invited us into the stillness practice is because stillness is one of the elements of the PL, personal leadership framework, that I'm going to talk about today. So, and I'll explain a bit more about that a little later. But I wanted us to experience that. And it's only one way of practicing stillness or cultivating stillness that we just did. There's many other ways, which I will talk about later on. So I'm excited to be here, and some of you I saw at the SIETAR conference last Saturday and Friday and Thursday in Atlanta. You came to my home territory, home turf, and others I haven't seen in a while. So thanks for joining me in this program. And just to tell you a bit more about my background before we go into the actual content, on the top right-hand corner is what kind of defines me, that I have two passports, like many of you I'm sure do. I came to the US after growing up in Germany for the first 20 or so years, a bit more than that. That's how long it took to grow up. I'm still growing up, actually. I came to Atlanta in the 80s, late 80s. And below that is my hometown, a very small, very, very homogeneous little village town in northern Germany called Goldenstedt. But you see two churches there. One is a Catholic and one is the Protestant church. So we had an ecumenical religious landscape in my hometown, and that was sort of my very first, if anything, exposure to difference. And that later on became something interesting, because I didn't even know the Catholic kids for the longest time until I went on the bus to the high school town and saw these kids and realized, oh, they're not like you, they're different. They go to a different church and have different customs around religion. And so even in my small hometown in this northern German part, I got exposed to differences, but that was not the only thing that I felt was different at the time. But I have made, I would call it dancing with difference, or handling differences, or managing differences as part of my life journey. And so at the top left, you see a well-known picture to all of us, where nonverbal communication has gone slightly awry. And so that's my baseline professional foundation, I would call it. After decades of running my own business here in Atlanta and doing work all over the world, I'm a little bit tired of of traveling so much. And so I've started coaching more and more. So I'm an executive coach. I got certified about 10 years ago, and but use a lot of my intercultural knowledge in my coaching work as well. And there's a picture of Atlanta, and then at the very bottom is a picture of me on a bicycle. And this was from last year, at the very end, the finish line of the AIDS Life Cycle charity ride, which actually had me go on my bicycle from San Francisco to Los Angeles in 7 days, 545 miles altogether. And so that was one of my biggest feats so far, physically, I think, in my life. And then the middle one here, you can see, is the World Cup logo for the Women's World Cup in France, which I got to go to this year. And I saw the US women's team win, which was wonderful. So two things or three things about the logistics that I want to say before I ask you where you're from. If you have any issues with technology or can't hear me well, please use the chat box. Sandy will be my eyes rather, and my mouth, or our mouth. And so we'll relay those messages to me and to us. And also, I would like for you to, in the next maybe few minutes, if you haven't already, grab a pen and a pencil somehow. Hopefully you're sitting at your desk and can do that easily. I'll be inviting you to do a bit of reflection or writing down a few things as one part of our interaction here. And Q&A, as Sandy says, will be at the end. So the last half hour or so. So please collect your questions now. You can start writing them in the chat box, but perhaps not yet. so we don't get them mixed up with our activities. So we have a few questions throughout the presentation where I'm going to ask you to write your answers in the chat box as well, and Sandy will relay those to us. And that's it for logistics. So let me go to the next screen. And this is your first task. So chat box, please use it. So tell us where you're calling in from, and also please tell us what the weather is like where you are. So
first person just weighed in is Lee Chen Chin. I don't know where she is, however. So we have someone from Dallas, Texas, where it's cold and cloudy.
Wow.
In Chicago, sunny and cold, just 15 degrees. Shauna is calling in from Washington, D.C., freezing but sunny.
Yes.
I saw Amy Rausch check in. Ricardo Flores is in Canada, chilly and sunny. That seems to be sort of the characteristic of today.
Cold.
Baxter's
yes.
in Moscow, Idaho, sunny and cool. Lin Jing is in Durham, North Carolina. Monica Scaglieri is in India. We have Raleigh, North Carolina, sunny but chilly. Sarah Spear is in Erie, Pennsylvania, where they had their first snow last night.
Wow. Perfect.
It's cold in St. Paul, but it's warmer than someplace. It's 25 degrees there. It was 15 someplace else. Katsuko is in Boston. It's sunny and cold there. Bethesda Fernandez from North Carolina, very cold. Let's see. She needs some help on how to listen to the talk. And I'm hoping somebody can respond to her, because I'm not sure that I'm the right one to try to her. She sees the image but does not have any sound.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
Javier Olivares is in Phoenix, where it's 72 degrees and nice.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Sandy. That's good for now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So hello to people in India, in Canada, where I used to live for 4 years. And I'm very happy that we have good representation across the continent and even across the world. So thank you so much. And here it is in Atlanta, it's sunny and also coolish, but no snow in sight, thank goodness yet. And we might not even get snow, as we only seems to be getting it once or twice every other year. So what are we going to do today? Let's see here. Not being able to forward my slides. There we go. So we're going to talk about personal leadership and just pretty much figure out what it is and define it. And we're going to look at it in the intercultural context. We're going to introduce the 6 PL practices and 2 PL principles to explain the framework. We'll briefly talk about the PL vision statement and the critical moment dialogue, and I'll inform you about the upcoming training of facilitators in April if you wanted to learn more about this approach or this framework. And if we have time, we'll do a little bit of exercise around using the critical moment dialogue so that you have an idea and get a taste of how that works. I want this to be practical and applying, hopefully it'll apply to the work that you're doing with your different constituencies of clients and students and so forth. So the last half hour we'll spend on talking about different ways, different client groups and different ways to apply PL. And some of my colleagues are online that can also chime in. Katsuko is a PL facilitator. I saw her online, so please help me out, Katsuko, when it's time to answer those questions. So that's our outline for today. Then I'm going to just put the question up here. What is personal leadership in your mind? And again, Sandy, if you could please watch the chat box. We won't be able to read everybody's answers, but what do you think of when you hear personal leadership? Just one word, if you can, please. Not a sentence, just one word. What comes to mind when you hear the word personal leadership? Sandy, if you wouldn't mind reading maybe, a handful of answers, or.
I'd be happy to. Jill says authenticity, and then accountability. appropriate, self-care, a way of life, focus, responsible, centeredness, grounded, a balance of trust and authority.
Wow, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All of those speak to me, especially the one about self-care, focus, all of them actually. Accountability even is also a very good one that we don't talk so much about in the PL community, but it's definitely also there. So I'm telling you in a minute how I got into PL, personal leadership, which is the code name, so to speak, PL. But before that, I'm going to, share with you our definition of personal leadership. And so the way we understand it is that we call it a framework of 2 principles and 6 practices designed to help us stay connected to inspiration and creativity in the face of the new and unfamiliar. And that's the basic one that we still use, and has served us in understanding and also in teaching PL to other people. And what you might focus on here is the terms inspiration, creativity, and then new and unfamiliar. And this is where intercultural context comes in, of course, as well. And we have discussed this, we meaning facilitators of PL, discussed this for years and years. Is it a framework? Is it a method? Is it a method? Is it a tool? I think most of us prefer the term framework or methodology. Method is too mechanistic and tool is somehow not enough. So although I did call it tool that keeps on giving in my title, admittedly, but that's because it sounded better and it was a short enough sort of word. So, and then I want to say a few more things about PL, which is, let's see here. So I'm having a hard time forwarding my slides. I'm not sure why that is. Here we go. The new and unfamiliar happens in many contexts, as we know, right? It could either be in a personal transformation, a personal change or move. It could be in a professional change or move. It could be in times of relocation geographically, in times of traveling. Basically, any time when we encounter difference in the form of the different elements of difference and diversity, and it could be either internationally or domestically. I think, as for many of us interculturalists, our focus in the past used to be more internationally. That's how I came to intercultural work many years ago, when I was 5, as Sandy pointed out. But now, as we are talking more and more about the intersection of diversity, especially in the US and intercultural work, as we heard last Saturday from one of the conference keynote speakers, Ahmed, those fields are more and more overlapping. And so it doesn't just apply internationally, obviously, it applies in many other contexts where difference matters and where difference comes up as a phenomenon. So this is the very basic definition of PL. Now I want to tell you the story of PL. And sorry, there's one more thing. What is it about? So yes, PL is about basically taking all these theories that we've known about and learned about, studied, in master's programs and on our own, from Hofstadter to Trompenas and to more current ones, IDI of course included, and turning that into a personal practice so that we actually can act competently across cultures. That's one of the first things that's really important about PL. The second thing is it guides my personal practice on a daily basis when I navigate change, conflict, or indecision. And so it helps me personally, Rita, on a daily basis, and I will explain how. And it of course also extends to my professional context. It helps me there as well. But it's basically the transformation or the translation from theory into practice. Second thing is, it also invites me to take leadership of my experience, to not become a victim in it, but to become an actor or a witness to it. And to wake up to my, what we call habitual responses and reactions, so that I actually am at choice and can better react, or even sometimes being proactive or act in a situation where there's a new and unfamiliar context, or where I'm stuck, so to speak, where something is up, as we say. The next thing is, or the final is, that we're also able to discern what's the right thing to do at this moment. And right action is in quotation marks, as you can see, because it only is the right action for the particular moment and place in this particular situation. And by doing this process, using this methodology, I'm often able to know and find out, what is the right thing to do for me now, or not to do, or say, or not to say. So that's sort of the overview of how we define and look at PL. Now the history, so I was a bit ahead of myself. Welcome to SIG. Many of you probably have been to SIG more than once. Others know about SIG, obviously. The Summer Institute for Intercultural Communication now in Portland, Oregon. So this is where it all started once upon a time. The then intern coordinators, and the title might be wrong, so please forgive me, Barbara and Gordon, but Barbara Schaetti and Gordon Watanabe in 1994 were once again faced with the same problem that they had been facing the previous years in their job of introducing the interns to life and work at SIG, realizing that despite all these experienced interculturalists coming together, there wasn't that much competence in them at all times, especially when it came to doing certain tasks or finding initial conflicts. A group of 30 people comes together in the Summer Institute, or 20. Now they're called fellows. They used to be called interns at the time, to put on this really incredible educational experience for all these participants and all the instructors. And yet after day 2 or day 3, there would be fighting going on, or conflicts would arise. So Barbara and Gordon again felt like this has to change. And over the next few years, and then with the help of Sheila Ramsey, who joined them and was a friend of theirs and a colleague, they developed the framework that we have today. It went through many iterations and changes, but basically that's the beginning of the PL framework. So here's the timeline. 1995, that's when they first sort of formally talked about it. It was introduced, I think, at SIG formally as an onboarding tool in 1998. And they began to use it in their consulting work, Sheila, Barbara, Gordon, and coaching services worldwide. They began writing articles about it and presenting on it on conferences. And in fact, in 2002, Gordon and Barbara did a presentation on PL at the Portland SIETAR conference, which I attended. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I have no idea what it is, but I'm going to go and listen to them because I knew them. And I came out of it thinking, that's interesting. Still don't know what it is, but I think I'm going to look into it more deeply. And then when they issued an invitation to learn more about it at a place in Colorado called Crestone, I signed up. And so the next year I went, and then I went for the next 13 years, every year, to Crestone, Colorado, to learn with other facilitators in training, other practitioners, and with the founders, as we call them, Barbara, Sheila, and Gordon, about PL, and to help shape the methodology and help think about it, talk about it, question it, and making it into what it is today. In 2008, they published the book, Personal Leadership, Making a World of Difference, which now, at this very moment, a group of people is very busy writing a second, not an edition, but a companion book, so to speak, about the application of PL in the world. And so that's going to come out at some point, hopefully very soon. And going on, it's become the focus of many PhD and research theses for MA programs. It's become part of curricula at some universities to especially onboard international students. And finally, from 2004 onwards, there has been a facilitator program every year. And there's going to be one next year as well, again, in Whidbey Island in Washington, which I'm going to tell you about a little bit later. So that's the history of PL. And I've been involved, as I said, since 2003. And have been a facilitator, senior facilitator since 2006, and have trained other facilitators, and I'm involved as much as I can still in our community of practitioners, which we call COP, and also in the group of facilitators, of which there are about 35 to 40 right now. So that's the community of PLers, as we call ourselves. Okay, if there's any questions so far, please let Sandy know by using the chat box. We're now going to turn to some of the core pieces of PL, and this is one of them. We call this the PL choice point. So let's imagine you're finding yourself in the midst of an interaction where it's not going very well. Let's say you're having a conflict with a colleague from another culture or from who's different from you. You're trying to, in that moment, navigate that situation, that conflict, and you have a choice, right? So let's say a colleague and you have a misunderstanding about something on email. So as we mostly work via virtual tools these days in our respective offices, what are your choices now? You can do what you have always done, and we call it operating from automatic pilot. You might send an email back quickly and say, hey, what's up here? This doesn't sit well with me. Please clarify. And your tone might be a little bit frustrated. Sorry, let's take a sip of tea here. And you might get a response or you might not. PL invites us at that moment to stop and to respond more mindfully and creatively to this unique situation. So that's the arrow on the right. And by stopping, by introducing a sometimes very brief moment of stillness, or I would say by creating a gap, you're putting yourself at choice in your reaction. You can either choose to react the exact same way as you did before and send that email and hope for a good outcome, or you can do something different, which I'm going to go explain to you in a minute. Again, the outcome is not guaranteed that it's any better or any different, but at least you have introduced that element of choice. And so this is why this choice point is so central to our PL methodology. And so we'll come back to that choice point in a minute. But let me first go over a few just sort of foundations that PL comes from. And so the founders basically went to their bookshelves, that's what they always say, and also just thought about, what has helped us become more culturally competent. And so a large field that it draws from is obviously our own field of intercultural communication. And you see the names that we all know here, including the Bennetts, including Lee Gardenswartz and Anita and Jorge who work at SIG a lot. Tiagi is here and Stella and many others. But they also felt that for us to have a more holistic kind of methodology, and what they looked at other sources of things that have been helpful to them. Leadership theory, Cooper Ryder's work in appreciative inquiry, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, Goldman's work on EI, emotional intelligence, Kuse's and Posner Leadership Challenge, Peter Senge, Learning Organization, Otto Scharmer, U-Curve, and so on. They looked at educational resources, Parker Palmer, Elizabeth Langer, and they looked at whole person self-development resources, including Pema Chodron, who some of you know, John Kabat-Zinn and Eckhart Tolle, and the sciences and psychology. The last one is especially important because Barbara Fredrickson and Martin Seligman are both psychologists steeped in positive psychology. And positive psychology has left a big imprint on PL. Positive psychology looks at things that work first and foremost instead of things that don't work, which are not being neglected, but that's not the starting point in PL. So those are some of the 2 things that I wanted to put forward, the PL choice point and the foundations that we base the methodology on. And now I would like to go briefly, but still in an important way, into the intercultural context, because that is the starting point of how PL was used first. That's not how I use it mostly these days. I use it mostly for leadership development work, but obviously I'm aware of the intercultural context, and so that's why I wanted to share it with you. So if we look at different spheres of intercultural competence, we can detect many. And by spheres, we mean contexts in which we learn to be interculturally competent, and also the steps we take in our development to learn to be interculturally competent. And there's more than 3, obviously, but we're going to focus on these 3 here, and just for sort of simplicity purposes. So the first sphere, I don't want to call it basic, but the foundational sphere, so to speak, is when you first come into contact with cultures. What you tend to focus on is to get culture-specific information. And that looks like this, right? You might develop work around or learn about working with the Japanese. You might be looking at different values that a certain cultural group shares, Asian Americans in this example. You might look at patterns in a certain culture. And again, this is very internationally situated, but this could also apply to diversity elements in looking at gender culture, you know, female or male values, or patterns that a certain group of minorities, for instance, share. So that's our first way of learning about culture, often when we look at one specific cultural group and get competent in this sphere, this layer, or this level. The next second sphere is to learn actually not just about this specific culture, because as we all know, we can learn about 200 plus cultures in the world, and then if we add diversity work to it, it becomes really difficult. So we learn about general patterns. And this is, of course, I don't have to explain this in a big way to you. We learn about various orientations, cultural dimensions or continua, communication styles, sense of physical space, and so forth, which allows us to then look at any kind of cultural group and detect patterns, and then be able to make comparisons between our cultural group and the other person's cultural group. And that's great, but that still sometimes doesn't help us in a certain situation when we have yet another pattern that we hadn't thought about, and also yet another group that we hadn't encountered before. And so PL allows us to look at the person across from us at that specific moment and myself at that specific moment. So it's very, in some ways you could say, situational and contextual. And so we talk about adding a third sphere to these first 2 of specific and general information. And that's the sphere of practicing personal leadership. So what happens here is that we are looking at our own experience in interaction with the cultural other. And the goal is to not get caught in our former knowledge, in our former assumptions, our former biases, or prior existing, should I say, it might be better. And then we're able to, for this particular situation, discern our right action. And that's what PL helps us. And it also, in some ways, since we talked about the overlap of diversity work and intercultural work, PL is actually very well situated to look at situations that are at the intersection of those 2 circles, where the overlap is. And PL could be sort of almost a unifying force bringing together those 2 fields. And so again, it's about the situation at that very moment. And it can apply PL in any kind of cultural context, not just, again, in sort of more known context, but something that you hadn't even thought about. And it does that by actually inviting us and teaching us to self-reflect. As we all know, self-awareness is the starting point of any kind of cultural learning about yourself and becoming aware of your own patterns and triggers and values. And PL gives us a very structured process for learning how to reflect on our situation at that given moment. So that's what I want to say. Are there any questions so far before I move into the next topic and introduce the principles and practices? Any questions, Sandy?
I'm not seeing any, Rita. People are listening.
Okay, that's great. So first, I think when Barbara and Gordon Sheila started out, they had 8 practices, like 8. The word steps isn't really so appropriate perhaps, but that's what sometimes, you know, we people might say. But then it became clear to them that 2 of these 8 practices were actually present in all of them. And so they divided them out and they made them the principles for PL, and I call them often the container holders. And these are, in this lovely yin and yang graphic, the 2 that we know these expressions really well: mindfulness and creativity. So what's mindfulness? It's a buzzword these days of humongous dimensions. Everybody talks about it, wants to practice it. I think only very few really actually do practice it. But I think for us as interculturalists, we have part of our work is to be mindful, to paying attention to differences in very specific ways. Otherwise, we couldn't do our work. And so I think we have a bit of a leg up compared to other professions in terms of being good at being mindful. So in the PL context, mindfulness invites us to wake up to our habitual patterns of behaving, so that we can bring self-awareness forward as both, we say, an instrument and a teacher. And so that we look with every situation with fresh eyes. That's the kind of mindfulness that we're talking about in PL. So not to go with what we know should be the case, but to look at every situation with fresh eyes. And somebody, when you encounter some intercultural conflict, don't go back to the habitual interpretation that you might have, but think, okay, what else could this mean? What haven't I thought about? And be mindful in this way. And creativity is not the creativity of Picasso or Beethoven. It's the creativity that's innate in all of us. All of us, I believe, are innately creative in that we can all generate ideas, that we can all listen to the wisdom that we have inside of us and act based on that wisdom or not. That we can all correct ourselves when we make a mistake or get off track. So creativity invites us to bring in something new, to really look at situation again with fresh eyes. It's a little bit similar to mindfulness, but in creativity, it's to look at all of our available resources and using all of them, especially the ones that actually bring us what I would call positive energy and that are life enhancing. So an example of being creative would be, for instance, from traveling, I know that I'm really bothered by haggling sometimes. When I travel to Middle Eastern countries or even the south of Europe, sometimes it seems like I'm asked to haggle for certain goods when I'm in the market, unless I want to pay really high prices, which I don't. So I always feel like, oh, not again, I have to do this haggling. But instead of looking at haggling, I can also just decide, well, you know, haggling is actually an art form that people in this culture engage in. And we are just bystanders as tourists, right? We're not really the ones that invented haggling or that are really deeply involved in it. Now we are, because we visit these countries. But even when you observe people that are haggling in the market with each other, it's really a dance, and to kind of see the beauty of it and not seeing it as something that's negative or burdensome, but something that's actually beautiful and creative. So that's an example of creatively looking at a situation with new eyes. So those are the principles, and they are, as you can see in this yin and yang format, they support one another, they depend on each other. So without mindfulness, you couldn't really be very creative, and creativity needs mindfulness to really work and flow. That's why they get presented in this format. So that's the container holders. Now I'm going to just briefly talk about the 6 practices of PL. As you can imagine, I could spend a long time on this, which we don't really have. So I'm going to do it fairly quickly so that we have a bit of time for practice. So starting at the top right, attending to judgment. This is a practice where, so when something happens, what happens that upsets us or is a conflict. In my situation, what happens, I could have a judgment right away. And this judgment might just take me down what we call a rabbit hole, right? I might just go on and off about like how bad that person is or how bad I am in the situation. But instead of being captured by my judgment in PL, I'm invited to actually attend to judgment and to not get pulled into something by it, but to actually use it as an informant, as a teacher, as an instrument, because I can learn from my judgment and from judgment, both positive and negative judgment. And to like ask myself, where's this coming from? And, what are the sources of my judgment? That's what attending to means. I also will have emotions when something happens, when a conflict comes up, right? When somebody treats me unfairly or does something that I don't understand in an intercultural communication. I might be upset, I might be frustrated, I might be impatient, I might be surprised, or I might be happy about something when something positive happens. That also can teach me something. Emotions tend to also sometimes overwhelm us, or they can trigger something in behaviors in us. So rather than getting triggered or overwhelmed or hijacked by my emotion, by naming them, I'm putting a tiny bit of space into my reactivity, and I'm able to actually become a witness to my emotions. That's what's meant by attending to emotion. These things don't always happen in order. I'm just explaining them in order so that we have a way to follow the practices here. So the third practice that also gives us input, and we call them the input practices, is that my body will tell me what's going on. So when there's a conflict, my stomach reacts. I get like a fist in my stomach, or my hands get sweaty, or my shoulders get tight. Because our body actually stores our behaviors in it on a cellular level. Our patterns, they get stored in our nervous systems. And so by paying attention to them, we actually can find out, something is really bothering me, and not sure what it is, but something is going on, something is up. So those are the three input practices. Going to the right now, to the left, sorry, cultivating stillness. That's that moment of creating a small gap so that we actually are putting ourselves at choice. This kind of gap makes it possible for me to actually listen to myself, to listen to what my body is telling me, to listen to what other information might be coming at me, and not react. This is a very, very crucial piece of the PL practices. And this stillness doesn't have to be in a 2-minute meditation. It can be just by looking at a picture on my desk. Okay, this is what it is. Or by touching something, or by taking a breath, quite frankly. That can also shift things around. And we talk about a PL shift sometimes, which I will explain in a little bit. So whatever you can do to create a gap, a moment of stillness, to help you disentangle from this being caught up in your emotions, your judgments, or your physical sensations. And then number 5, on the left-hand side in the middle, we call that engaging the ambiguity of the situation, engaging ambiguity. It's one of my favorites and also my least favorites because it is hard. Or it can be like, not hard, but it can take some time. This is the practice which we are being asked to kind of shut down what we think we know about the situation, and to actually ask a question such as, what do I not know here? And what more can I not know? So that I really use the ambiguity as a teacher and an instrument to learn from. Because in that sort of not knowing is where stuff happens, where we actually learn about things, where insights come to us. And so to open ourselves up to the inspiration of the moment, that's what we want to achieve, or that's what we are hoping. That's what might happen in this moment, and it might not. But at least we were giving ourselves the opportunity or the possibility for this to happen by not immediately saying, oh, I know what this is about. You know, they are just reacting out of their relationship orientation. Well, they might or they might not, right? For being late. So, or whatever the situation might be. So it's almost like, you know, let's pause here for a moment and ask ourselves, you know, what do I not know here? And the last one, aligning with vision, lets us kind of step back and take stock and see, you know, what do I really want to be about? What am I like at my highest and best in any of these situations? What's my vision of my best self? And for that, I need to actually have an idea of what that is. And I'm going to share a vision that I wrote a little while ago with you. And we lead our participants in an exercise of creating their own personal leadership vision statements. So because when I'm clear on my vision, you know, me as an interculturalist, I want to be joyful, I want to be well, I want to work with other people, I want to be in collaboration with them. Those are my best qualities. And if I'm in a conflict or in a situation where something is up and I have none of these qualities present, I'm not going to be at my highest and best. And so I cannot align, you know, I need to align myself somehow better, either by changing the situation or by changing my vision of myself. And so that's what we mean by aligning with vision. So those are the 6 practices. And again, this is a lot to take in. If you wanted these definitions in greater detail, I'm happy to send you or add them to the slide deck actually before I post them on the website. So, or before we post them on the SIETAR website. So I'll add the definitions as well. So moving right along, just an example of a vision statement. And again, the crafting process takes a little while, but it's really almost all you have to do is kind of get a sense of what makes you be at your highest and best. And for me, it's these things: as an effective cross-cultural bridge builder and PR practitioner at my highest and best, I am joyful, playful, loving, and well, so that my path is filled with integrity and clarity. There are certain elements we talk about when we do vision writing. One of them is purpose, because to tie something to, you know, a purpose with your work or your life makes it a lot more effective. And so that expresses, in this case, my purpose. And my qualities are joyful, playful, loving, and well. So that's what I look for in situations. If I don't have those, at least 2 of them or 3, I probably need to do something differently. That makes sense. All right, so, and then getting to the last piece of our elements of PL, so to speak. And in order for us to actually practice these practices, Barbara Sheila Gordon thought, well, you know, we need some structure here, because otherwise we can ask ourselves these questions or look at these 6 practices, but it's easier if we have actually a structure. So the structure that they came up with, they called the critical moment dialogue. And why is it called the critical moment dialogue? Because we can use it in a moment of decision making, where something is up, where we have to where we are in a conflict. So that's why it's called critical moment dialogue. And the dialogue is really actually sometimes misleading, because it could be a dialogue, but it mostly is a monologue with yourself, or dialogue with yourself, you might say. So you can do this dialogue exercise activity quietly by yourself. You can use it with somebody else. You can do it in writing. You can do it in your head. You can do it by dancing it. You can do it in many different formats. So we teach it to people first in a very structured way by using a number of questions that all relate to the practices. And so the first CMD, which is the short form for critical moment dialogue, format that we used was like 18 pages long. And it turned out, well, a little bit too long for certain situations. And so we came up with a shorter version, which actually looks like this. We call it the short form mind map. And you can see the practices on the right and the left, and with a few questions underneath it. So we'll go over this in a minute, but I wanted to show you first, again, going back to the choice point, in any situation, this is where you can apply the CMD something is, where there's something up, that's where you can apply it. So again, it could be a cultural difference that you encounter, a conflict, a moment of indecision. And again, the choice is do what you've always done, as we just said a little while ago, or you can choose to practice personal leadership by inviting reflection, using the critical moment dialogue, by taking leadership of the situation and of yourself, so to speak. So the CMD, again, is available in different formats. The purpose is that it's about discerning for ourselves what's really going on here. We say the essential truth of a situation or experience, really what's up here in essence, right? What's this really about? And again, it's a critical moment because it is a moment in our lives that might be fairly unimportant. Like, should I stay home tonight or should I go out? You could do a CMD on that question. Or should I move to Canada or should I stay here? Which is what I faced before I moved to Canada. And I actually sat down and did a CMD, a long form CMD, and tried to get clarity, and it helped me doing that. And so it's basically the 6 practices in a structured format. And again, you can choose not to follow the order. You can pick only 1 or 2 of the practices. But what the experience shows is if you go through the entire canon of practices, you're actually probably more likely to experience some sort of shift or aha or insight or revelation, or something will become clearer to you, so that you are able to discern your right action. So that's what the CMD invites us to do, and I would actually now invite you to actually do a little CMD with me for the next 10 or so minutes, if you're up for that. So this is where your pen and paper comes out, if you wouldn't mind. And the starting in the middle, right here, something is up, right? So think of a situation that's not too big, too deep, where you are struggling somewhat. So maybe you had a conflict with a colleague at work recently. Think of something current. Think of some interaction that didn't quite finish in a way that you felt was, to your liking, where you felt like unresolved. So I'm going to walk you through it by giving you my own story. So I was facilitating a workshop last week in Europe, and the audience was mixed, European mixed. Many of the participants were from Russia and Ukraine, the Russian-owned company, but there were others as well. And but there was maybe half of them were Russian participants. And what happened is that I left the training after the first day really unhappy, because I felt these participants, I don't get to them. They're not responding. They're rejecting. They're resisting what we're teaching them. It was a class about leadership, agile leadership, actually. And every time we tried to introduce a new model, my colleague and I, in the best way we thought we knew, they would say, oh, this doesn't apply to us. It was just sort of an anti-reaction. So again, think of your situation, and just for a moment, try and answer these questions, maybe just by jotting down a few words. What are your positive and negative judgments about yourself or the other in this situation, and what are you assuming? It's important to think of both positive and negative judgments. And also it's important to think about yourself and the other in the situation in the widest sense possible. So we don't have time to do this in a really big way, but to sort of get an idea of, what might have been going on with your judgment in that situation. In my case, my judgment was very alive. I judged these Russian participants in a way that was rather harsh, shall we say. They're disrespectful, they're not paying attention, they're on their phones. Why are they here? And myself too, like, why am I doing this? I'm not doing a good job enough. I don't get it. I shouldn't be teaching this. So I was also being very harsh on myself, and there was not very much positive. Maybe I thought, what can I learn from this? But like dragging. Okay. Second practice, emotions. Attending to your emotions. In your situation, what are the positive and negative emotions that you were having? And why do you care about this so much? Take a moment and write those down for yourself. Maybe you were feeling frustration, anger, and try, if you do this again later on, try to be as detailed as possible, because that gives us the most information. So in my case, I was upset, angry, weary, impatient with myself and with them. And just like, almost like, why is this happening to me? I was a little stunned because, you know, I actually taught this class to other audiences, just not in this contact with my Russian participants. So I was a little surprised as well. And I care because I want to do a good job, obviously, right? I wanted them to get the most of it, but I felt that they weren't really engaged the way they could have been. Number 3, attending to your physical sensation. What are you feeling in your body and where? And what is this trying to tell you? So jot down an answer to that. To me, I was just feeling overall kind of deflated. That was my feeling. And a little tired and weary. I'd worked so hard, I felt all day, and I just didn't really go so well. And I felt I wasn't really serving those participants in the way that I should have. And so I felt, yeah, exhausted. So moving on to the next one, let's all just take maybe 3 breaths together and try to sort of clear our minds and just focus on our breath for 3 breaths. So and see how your breath gets deeper and how you become a bit calmer maybe. And then what's coming up for you? What's bubbling up? What insights might you have? I did this at night after the first day. I had a second day going. So I was like, I did this exercise and I thought, oh, okay. I began to sort of see, you know, this is not about them resisting. I just sort of had this idea that it's different. And then number 5, the favorite, I try to engage the ambiguity. What do I not know here? And what more can I not know? Well, I don't know. Do they really not like it? How much are they getting from the teachings, the content? Is it language barriers? Is it their cultural background? Is it their idea of hierarchy? Is it their view of, you know, an instructor? Is it a gender thing? Is it an age thing? I really, there were so many things I didn't know. I was just sort of assuming that they didn't want to get it, or that they were, you know, being a bit rebellious. But there were so many things I just, and you know, what did I know about Russian culture? So I actually asked a German friend who lived in Russia for 5 years, and she said, well, she actually gave me information that showed a whole different perspective on this, which was that in you know, in Russian culture, when you are being taught something, often the tendency is to question what you're being taught, and so it can seem very much like you're rejecting it, but in fact, it's not really rejection. It's just a way of interacting with it, and I felt really almost extra, you know, like duh, because being German, that's what German audiences do too. I just didn't sort of make the transfer. I didn't know enough about my Russian participants, I think, in their backgrounds. So what is it you didn't know in your situation? What couldn't you know? So jot that down. And so no, you might not have the answer, but at least you have the questions now, right? Because asking the questions is often the way to finding the answers. So, and then lastly, okay, so how does my experience or your experience align with a vision of yourself. Again, you didn't do the exercise about crafting your vision statement, but you have a sense of, you know, what you like at your highest and best. And so can you discern a gap between that highest and best, or you at your best, and what's happening in the situation? And how can you get that gap? How can you strengthen the alignment? So my vision was joyful, happy, well, and I wasn't very joyful, right? So I needed to actually learn more about Russian culture is what I needed to do. And I needed to get a grip on myself for the next day. And so we had a very nice dinner that night. I talked to my colleague about it, and we actually laughed about ourselves. And so we decided to both of us, you know, change our attitude the next morning and just act like that first day wasn't so negative, but having a more positive attitude. So not faking it, but do kind of feel like, you know, let's start again. This is a new day. We have another day of learning together, and looking at the participants with a different and a fresh eye, so to speak. So we did. And actually, this is my right action, right? So that's what I did. And what is your right action before I go to mine to, you know, tell you what happened? But so what is your right action? What, if anything, is the right thing for you to do or to say? So write that down as well. And again, you might not find the answer to your issue or to your situation, your conflict, your dilemma, but perhaps you got more clarity on it. Perhaps you have an idea of where you can go with this. Perhaps you thought of another resource that you can consult. Perhaps something shifted in you energy-wise. So with my newly armed myself with my newly gained knowledge about Russian culture and my attitude adjustment, I went in the next morning, and my colleague did too. And actually, we asked the participants about the day before. Now, what they thought about it? Did they have any questions? And they actually said, yeah, it was interesting to us. It was helpful. We were like, really? Internally, I thought they said it was helpful to them. Wow, I never would have thought so. And then the second day went better. I mean, it still was a little bit stumbly at points because I was, again, taken aback by some of their facial expressions, but I also was able to put them in a context much better, to the knowledge that I, you know, neglected to get beforehand, but had gained a bit of overnight or by asking my friend. So in the end, it worked out fine, and we got good evaluations, and they seemed to really got something out of the workshop. So then the last question would be, what have you learned from this reflection? And, you know, for me, I learned that I need to do my homework better. After all these years of working in this field, I still didn't do my homework. And so, oh well, forgiving myself, moving on and doing better the next time. And just not to, you know, try to just in a situation when it's a high stress situation, when you're, you know, in front of a classroom full of people looking at you and, you know, with a colleague. But I need to really do my practices, my meditation practice, to be able to not get caught up in my emotional spiral and sort of going down with that spiral. That's what I learned as well, or relearned. So it's 5 minutes after the hour. We have 25 minutes left. So I wanted you to experience this process so that you know what the 6 practices look like in action, or get a glimpse of it anyway. And I'll do one more thing before we open it up for Q&A. If anything comes to you, you can start writing your questions into the chat box now, and so Sandy will relay them to us. Before we go to the Q&A, I wanted you to know that we have a training of facilitators coming up on lovely Whidbey Island in Washington State. You take the ferry across from Seattle and you're in a different magic environment. It's at Whidbey Institute, and the facilitators are going to be Tatjana Viertelmeister, our former president, and many of you know Tatjana, and our colleague Marie Sheffield. The two of them are both PL senior facilitators, and they have teamed up to lead anybody who's interested in learning to facilitate PL in this 6-day exploration on Whidbey Island. If you have any questions or want information, you can go to the website, plseminars.com, or send them an email at shifthappens2020@gmail.com. I love the name that they came up with, Shift Happens. And that's actually, we talked about that before in our PL community. Here's the website, plseminars.com. It's a lovely website. You can get information about this TOF upcoming in Whidbey there as well. And that's the book. Again, it's available on Amazon. Again, it's a good 10 years old now. It still has all the practices, and I mean, it has all the core elements in it, and they're described in a very accessible way. It's got lovely haikus at the beginning of each chapter, and my book, I've used my book on a daily basis almost for many, many years. So it's one of my most valued resources. And the new book is coming out hopefully soon. So Q&A, here we are.
Okay, I will read the two comments, one question, one comment. But if people would like to actually talk to you and ask their
we could open it up, right?
They can unmute and we'll open it up.
Yes, let's do that.
First, Chris Cartwright said, "Thanks for being vulnerable and sharing this with us," which I think was a very nice reaction, and typically Chris. Says, "This seems like a long process to go through in a moment. Does it eventually happen faster in your mind, or?"
Oh, great question. Yes. So first of all, Chris, thank you for saying this. Yes, I think you'll find that in the community, everybody is like this, and you're about to become a senior facilitator, which I know. So you're already part of it, and yeah, it's a very open-hearted and open-minded and very supportive community. We had a global gathering in April in San Francisco where about 30 of us came together, practitioners and facilitators, both, and we had just a lovely time together. And so that's one of the things that people always say about PL. It's it's a community that really keeps me in it, and we have a Google group, so we share information on it, and there's a newsletter coming out. It comes out every so often, and announcements about other activities. So thank you, Chris. The second question is a really, really good question. Yes, it does take a little while to kind of wrap your head around the 6 practices. And I can promise you this, once you've done it once, even maybe after you've done the CMD in the short form that we just did together, it really does become faster. And in fact, now I sort of instinctively know that I can use it, and it comes, I remember using it, which in the beginning I didn't. It's like I was all upset about something, and I have this tool, so let me use it, or this methodology. But it really becomes faster. The more you do it, the more you do the CMD, the more you talk about it, it really becomes, to me, it's almost like second nature. There's also a very nifty thing. We have this little practice card, which has, it's for your wallet almost, which has the process model, as we call it, the 3 steps, and sum things up, make your choice, invite reflection, and then here's the 6 practices. And this we used to, I think this is available on the you can write to the office. I think they're still available, or you can make your own. But it really does become faster, promise. And I can attest to this. The more I do it, the more it becomes second nature, the more it becomes my own practice. It's different for everybody, obviously, but and sometimes I really focus on only 1 or 2 aspects of the methodology, the ambiguity, because those questions are really powerful, or the question about why do I care about this so much in, attending to emotion? Oh, because my value of fairness was affected by this situation. So, how can I get back to, applying fairness here? So yes, good question. Thank you.
Okay, we do have another question and a comment. The question is, does judgment occur before emotion or the other way around?
Yeah, good question. So again, as I said in the when I talked about the practices, the order is really, it's not, doesn't go in order. It is on a circle, and you could jump from feeling something in your body first, like, oh my God, something is going on. I feel it in my body. My stomach is tight. Or you could have an emotion, and and then think more thoughts about it. So no, it doesn't always come one before the other. It just depends what kind of a person you are. Some people are more in touch, or they experience the environment more through emotions, and others more through their heads, and another group more through their bodies. So if you're a body-centered person, you are maybe a practitioner of yoga or Tai Chi, then that might be your first sort of entry point. If you're more of an emotional person, it might be the emotional side. So it doesn't really matter where you start, as long as you start noticing.
Thank you. Thank you to Marcella Simon for that question. And then the comment we have at the moment is from Christy Ward, who says, I will try to use this looking forward, but I also think that the mind map process provides a useful way to look back at experiences we perceive as past failures that might haunt us and reframe them as opportunities for growth. And she also sharing.
Is there something else? Sorry, I interrupted you, Sandy.
Oh no, that was what she had to say.
Thank you so much, Christy. Great comment. And the word haunted tells me that, when you say haunted, that means something is not quite resolved yet, right? So otherwise you wouldn't be thinking about it so much. So this is perfect for that. In fact, my very first CMD, 2003 in Crestone, was about something that had haunted me for a long time. I had done a seminar facilitation again in Germany. That's where it seems to happen, a few years back. And it was with a young group of people working for a retail company, retail chain. And since then, I had this sort of trigger, shall we say, with a certain group of participants, which was young males, so in the age group of 30. And so whenever I faced a class like that, something was uneasy for me. I would become tongue-tied and I didn't know what's this about. And so I did the CMD, and I was able to kind of actually go back to that situation, and something happened that made me feel guilty because I didn't feel like I did well by this one participant. It's sort of a longer story that I don't need to get into, but by doing the CMD, I was able to kind of clean that up for myself. And so since then, it's been different for me. That group is no longer sort of difficult for me. It doesn't haunt me anymore. So this is a very good way of using the CMD process. And if anybody wants the long CMD version, which we have, in a Word document, I can send that to them. And I didn't put my email out, but should have done that. I can type my email out really quickly here, and you can actually, or it's just rw, my last name, @gmail.com. Just send me an email and you can get the information. If you can put them in the chat box, Sandy or Karen, rwuebbeler, my last name, @gmail.com. Just send me an email and I'll send you the long format. If there's no more questions, are there more questions? I also wanted to talk about.
Well, there's one more comment, that I think you would like to hear.
Yes.
This is from Katsuko, who is actually responding to Christy's comment and your response. Mm-hmm. She said, in CMD, your exploration of the PL6 practices occur organically, in a sense, as Rita explained. She goes on to say, your emotion would trigger more thoughts, and thinking of what do I not know might trigger more emotions. So these are from her, those are comments from her own experience practicing PL.
And Katsuko, thank you so much. Katsuko is also a senior facilitator of PL and has practiced PL for many, many years. And so thank you for adding that to my explanation. That makes it better. Thank you. So what I wanted to talk about, but please keep your questions coming, and I'll leave some more time at the very end, if you have a few more minutes, about how I use PL in which context. So as I said, I don't use PL so much in intercultural informal settings for intercultural training, although I use it with expat training sometimes still, which I do still occasionally. So when they tell me a story or a situation when they first arrive in their new host country, I might invite them into sort of exploring this by using the CMD without ever calling it CMD. But I ask them the questions that I take from the CMD process, and that's often very, very helpful. So in that sense, I do apply to intercultural context. These days, I mostly apply it in leadership training and team development training. And how do I do this? So I use the PL vision statement writing process a lot in coaching and also for leadership coaching and in team building. So I'm a leadership coach. Many of my clients struggle with not being so clear on what they stand for as a leader, you know, what are their desired new qualities. And so then we do the PL visioning process, which gives them clarity of, you know, what are they like at their highest and best. And that's usually very, very helpful to them and helps them with their own development. So that's how I use it in leadership development. And in team building, I've had several times where a team wanted to develop a vision for themselves. And so I use the PL process there as well and have them write their vision statement as a group by identifying their desired qualities, team qualities, and also the purpose for this team, you know. And so that's really a very powerful process and has worked well for me in my team building workshops. And just to share where I teach PL these days, so I still teach it at a university in Canada. I used to live in Halifax for 2 years, and so I made connections with the local university, Dalhousie. And so twice a year, they invite me up to teach personal leadership. And the class is called PL, Leading the Self Before Leading Others. So it attracts people from all walks of life. It's in the College of Continuing Education. I have people from all sorts of government departments, private enterprises, nonprofits, and I've done this for the past 8 years. And it's great fun. It's a 2-day class. We do the entire process. We practice. We do several CMDs. We write a vision statement. We do vision alignment exercises, and it's really, really great. So that's where I do it most frequently. I taught it this April at the Atlanta public school system to 30 administrators and employees of the public school system. They also loved it. That was a day-long program. I've taught it to Women in Leadership, which is a technical association of women that work in high-tech companies. Also a day-long process, a day-long class. I've taught it to a team of sales people in a pharmaceutical company. 1.5 day long program, I think it was. I've done the Islamic Speakers Bureau of Atlanta, did a half-day workshop with it. In a culturalist group. I mean, yeah, there's so many different ways to teach it. And all of us practitioners or facilitators have used it in many different ways. Again, different industries, different types of organizations. International schools, I know Barbara has taught it there with the teachers. And I'm more of a corporate person, so I don't have that kind of background, but many of our colleagues work in educational settings. And so it's often used with study abroad programs where they teach the PL methodology before they leave on a study abroad. Then they have the students do CMDs and come back and debrief the CMDs and the experience based on the PL framework. The CIEE has used it, the Council for International Educational Exchange. They have sent several of their employees, staff members to learn the PL methodology in TOF programs, and so it's used there. Yeah, so it's I always say it's small but mighty, and to me it's one of my tools that I use, one of my favorite tools. Not the only one, but one of my favorite tools.
It's clearly a useful one, Rita.
Yes.
Yeah, I had heard about PL and I knew a lot of the people who were involved and never took the time to learn. And
Yeah.
it's actually one thing that I regret because I think it would have been a very useful tool to use throughout my
Yes.
career.
Yes. So if anybody
I'd like
else,
to.
yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, if you have more to say, I was
Yeah,
going to
if anybody, I
do
mean,
something that Christy said.
yeah, if anybody wants to chime in via voice or voice and picture, Katsuko or Chris, you are colleagues, please do so. We have a few more minutes. But back to Sandy, if you wanted to say something about Christy's comment.
Yeah, Christy's comment was to thank you,
Mm.
and it's a timely reminder that PL works only if she's speaking of herself, if I'm committed to doing, using, and practicing it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to the webinar, I am inspired to renew my relationship with PL and therefore with myself.
Yes, great. Yeah.
Yep. Rita, I'd like to thank you for a really good, solid webinar. I've been very pleased with the speakers we've had, and that goes for today as well. I think it's been really, for me, a very inspiring webinar. And I also really appreciated hearing your personal experience with PL. And I also thank you for that vulnerability.
Oh, you're welcome. And again, if anybody wants to talk to me offline about it, please email me at rwuebbeler@gmail.com. I'd be happy to tell you more about it, or if you're interested in the TOF, that information was shifthappens2020@gmail.com. And the website is the other resource and we also have a Facebook group that you can find by, I think, putting in PL seminars. So yes, so thank you, Sandy, for inviting me. Thank you, SUSA, SIETAR USA, also called SUSA, for having these great webinars. And I'm happy to have been able to share my experience with all of you and wish you all a lovely, happy, and not so cold weekend. Sunny would be my wish for you. So yeah.
Okay. For those of you who are still with us, and it is actually quite a few folks, I would like to preview what we're having next in December. It will be the first week in December. The date is still, whether it's going to be Tuesday or Thursday, we haven't decided. But it's one of those webinars that's timely and seasonal. We have Miguel Gandert, who is he's a professor emeritus from the Department of Communication at the University of New Mexico. He did an opening keynote address for one of our conferences, and I just fell in love with his work. He's a photojournalist, and he has such a different perspective on what you find in the cultures in the Southwest. So he's going to be sharing that with us. Oh, never rings. I'm so sorry. What the title of the webinar is going to be Nuevo Mexico's Midwinter Celebrations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, look at the intercultural symbols and re-examination of the tricultural myth. So he's going to examine the complex narrative and symbols of Hispano and Native American communities in the Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico. And he'll be using his photography to show us and help us understand what these midwinter celebrations are and what they mean to the cultures in the American Southwest. He also has a new concept that he wants to talk about. It's a new historical cultural classification that is called genizarios. And so if you want to learn something new, here is a really nice opportunity to sit back that first week in December and join us for this webinar. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rita.
Thank you so much. And everybody have a good weekend. Bye, Sandy. Bye, everybody. And bye, Karen.
Goodbye.
Bye.